translated by Donald Rayfield. Chapter The Apostle Paul. When I dislocated my foot, by falling down a slippery pole ladder in the open pit, the authorities realized that I would be lame for a long time. As sitting idly was out of the question, they transferred me to work as an assistant to our carpenter Adam Frisorgia, which both of us, Frisorgia and I, were very happy about. In his first life Frisorgia had been a pastor in a German village near Markstadt on the Volga. We met at one of the big transit camps while we were being quarantined for typhus, and we came here together to prospect for coal. Like me, Frisorgia had been in the Tiger before, and he had been listed as a goner. He had been taken from the mines to the transit camp in a semi-insane state. As invalids, we were sent to prospect for coal. We were meant to provide backup since the workforce in prospecting was made up exclusively from free hired labor. True, these free laborers had in the recent past been prisoners, but they had just completed their terms or sentences, and they were known in the camps a little contemptuously as freebies. When we were transferred, the 40 free hired men could barely scrape together 2 rubles when they needed to buy tobacco. All the same, they were now a class above us. It was generally understood that in 2 or 3 months they would get decent clothes, be able to get a drink, receive ID papers, and, after a year, perhaps even return home. These hopes were brighter still when Paramanov, the man in charge of prospecting, promised them fantastic salaries and polar circle rations. "You'll be wearing top hats when you go home," the boss kept telling them. No such talk of top hats or polar circle rations was ever directed at us prisoners, though. At least Paramanov was polite to us. He wasn't allotted any prisoners for prospecting, and getting 5 men to provide backup services was the most that Paramanov could get out of the authorities. We didn't know each other when our names were called from a list, and we left the barracks to be inspected by his sharp shining eyes. He was very pleased by the answers to his questions. One of us, Izgybin, a wit with a grey moustache, was a baker. He hadn't lost his natural vitality in the camps. His skills were of some help to him, so that he wasn't as emaciated as the rest. The second man was a one-eyed giant from Kamenets-Podolsk, a stoker on a steam locomotive. He told Paramanov. "So you can do a bit of metal work," said Paramanov. I can," the stoker confirmed willingly. He had long ago figured out that working with free prospectors would be very much to his advantage. The agronomist Trazanov was the third man. Agronomy was a profession that delighted Paramanov. No attention, naturally, was paid to the torn rags the agronomist was wearing. In the camps people are not judged by their clothes, and Paramanov knew enough about the camps. I was the 4th man. I was neither a baker, nor a metal worker, nor an agronomist. But I was tall, and that seemed to reassure Paramanov. In any case, it wasn't worth going to the trouble of altering the list for the sake of 1 man. He nodded at me. But our 5th man behaved very oddly. He mumbled the words of a prayer and covered his face with his hands, so that he couldn't hear Paramanov's voice. That, however, didn't surprise the chief. Paramanov turned to the supervisor who was standing next to him with a pile of yellow folders, our so-called personal files, in his hand. "He's a carpenter," said the supervisor, guessing what Paramanov meant to ask. The induction was over, and we were taken to the prospectors' camp. Later, Frisorgia told me that when he was called on, he thought he was being singled out to be shot, so badly had he been threatened by the interrogator when he was still in the mines. We spent a year together in the same barracks and we never ever had an argument. That was rare among prisoners, whether in the camps or the prisons. Quarrels started over the most trivial things, and in no time cursing could reach such a degree that the next step, it seemed, could only be a knife or, at best, a red-hot poker. I had soon learned not to pay much attention to the florid cursing. The heat soon died down, and if both sides continued for some time to curse each other idly, that was only done for show, to save face. So I never had a quarrel with Frisorgia. I think that this was thanks to him, because he was the most peaceful person on earth. He never disparaged anyone, he spoke very little. He had an old man's voice, quivery, but the quivering seemed somehow put on, overdone. It was how young actors speak in the theatre when they are playing old men. In the camps many men try, and often successfully, to seem older and physically weaker than they really are. They don't always do so for any conscious purpose, it's instinctive. The ironic trick played by life is that at least half of the people who exaggerated their age and underplayed their strength ended up in an even worse state than the state they were imitating. But in fact, there was no pretense about Frisorgia's voice. Every morning and evening he would pray, too quietly to be heard. He turned away from everyone and looked at the floor. If he took part in the general conversation, it was only when the subject was religion, so he took part very seldom, since prisoners disliked talking about religion. Our beloved Isgaibin, who always loved obscenity, would try to tease Frisorgia, but the only response to his jokes was a smile so peaceful that his sallies were wasted. Frisorgia was liked by all the prospectors, even by Paramanov, for whom Frisorgia made a remarkable desk, which took him, apparently, 6 months to complete. We had neighboring bunks, so we often chatted. Sometimes Frisorgia waved his little hands like a child when he was amazed by my knowledge of popular gospel stories, material that he was simple-minded enough to think was the preserve of a narrow circle of religious people. He giggled and showed great pleasure when I revealed such knowledge. It stimulated him into starting to tell me things from the Gospels I could recall only shakily or not at all. Once, however, Frisorgia made a mistake when he listed the names of the 12 apostles. He included the Apostle Paul. With the self-assurance of an ignoramus, I had always considered the Apostle Paul as the real creator and theoretical leader of the Christian religion. I knew a little of Paul's biography and didn't miss my chance of correcting Frisorgia. No, no, said Frisorgia, laughing. You don't know, listen. He started bending his fingers. Peter, Paul, Mark. I told him everything I knew about the Apostle Paul. He listened to me carefully and said nothing. It was now late, time to go to sleep. I woke up in the night, and in the flickering smoky light of the kerosene lamp I saw Frisorgia's eyes were open and I heard him whisper, Lord, help me. Peter, Paul, Mark. He stayed awake until morning. Then he went to work early and returned late in the evening, when I was already asleep. I was woken by an old man's quiet weeping. Frisorgia was on his knees, praying. What's wrong? I asked, after he finished praying. Frisorgia searched for my hand and squeezed it. You're right, he said. Paul was not one of the 12 apostles. I forgot about Bartholomew. I said nothing. "Are you surprised at my tears?" he asked. "They're tears of shame. I should not have forgotten such things. That's a sin, a great sin. A stranger has to point out an unforgivable mistake by me, Adam Frisorgia. No, no, it's not your fault at all. It's me, it's my sin. But it's good that you corrected me. Everything will be well." I had trouble reassuring him, and after that, shortly before I dislocated my foot, we became even greater friends. Once, when there was nobody in the carpentry workshop, Frisorgia took a greasy cloth wallet out of his pocket and with a gesture got me to come to the window. "Here," he said, showing me a tiny cracked photograph, "look at this snapshot." It was a photograph of a young woman with the casual expression you get on all snapshots. The yellowed, cracked picture had been carefully framed with colored paper. "That's my daughter," said Frisorgia solemnly. "My only daughter. My wife died a long time ago. True, my daughter doesn't write, she probably doesn't know the address. I've written a lot to her and I still do. Only to her. I never show anyone this photo. I brought it from home. 6 years ago I took it off the chest of drawers. Paramanov came through the workshop door. He had not made a sound. "Your daughter, is it?" he said, after a quick look at the photo. "My daughter, sir," said Frisorgia with a smile. "Does she write to you?" "No. How can she forget her old man? Write me a request to search for her, and I'll send it off." "What's wrong with your leg?" "I'm lame, sir." "Well, if you're lame, you're lame." Paramanov then went out. After that Frisorgia was no longer secretive with me. When he finished his evening prayers and lay down on his bunk, he would get out the photograph of his daughter and stroke its colored frame. We lived like this, without incident, for about 6 months, and then they brought the mail. At the time, Paramanov was away prospecting, and his secretary, a prisoner called Razanov, took delivery of the mail. Razanov turned out to be an Esperanto speaker, not an agronomist, not that this was a hindrance to him. He was very deft at flaying dead horses, at bending thick iron pipes by filling them with sand and heating them red hot on a bonfire, and at doing all of his boss's office work. "Take a look at this," he said to me. "Look at this declaration we've received about Frisorgia." The packet was an official statement with a request to inform prisoner Frisorgia, Article of Criminal Code, Sentence, of his daughter's declaration, a copy of which was attached. Her declaration was a brief and clear statement that, being convinced that her father was an enemy of the people, she renounced him and asked that her relationship to him be annulled. Razanov held on to the piece of paper and turned it over and over. "What a nasty piece of work," he said. "What did she have to do that for? She isn't joining the party, is she? I was thinking of something else. Why send declarations like that to your father when he's in prison? Was it a peculiar sort of sadism, like the authorities' habit of notifying relatives of a prisoner's fictional death, or was it just a desire to do everything according to the rules? Or something else? Listen, Vanya, I told Razanov, have you made a record of the incoming mail? How could I? It's only just coming. Then let me have that packet, and I told Razanov what it was all about. How about the letter? He said hesitantly. She's probably going to write to him, too. You can intercept the letter, too. All right, take it. I crumpled up the package and threw it through the open door of the stove, which was alight. A month later the letter arrived. It was just as brief as the declaration, and we burned it in the same stove. Not long after, I was moved somewhere else, and Frizorgia was left behind. I don't know what happened to him afterward. I often recalled him, while I still had the strength to recall anything. I could hear his quivery, anxious whisper, "Peter, Paul, Mark."